nation for the fort to be built for the protection of the Osage. Now, as much as they could be at that time, that is what they meant. They were trying to protect the Osage people, which is a bit odd because the Osage were very tall. Like, their average height was taller than a typical white person they would meet. They were tall people. And they were skilled warriors and skilled hunters. So there wasn't much protection they needed. However, because the early 1800s, we were still in skirmishes with the British were buying furs from the Native American people in order to destabilize our country as much as they could and to cause insurrection. And so by creating this fort to protect the people and be a trade house, it was supposed to help stabilize the region and the native peoples here. Did it do that? I don't know. To some extent, yes. It was actually a pretty nifty idea.
Well, sure.
Because the way it worked was the Osage would bring their furs.
Mm-hmm.
And fur trading was a solid thing back at the time.
Oh, well, absolutely. You used them for all kinds of stuff.
It was the currency of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like, so when we were there was like a bear head, there were fox pelts, there were bunny pelts, there were actually some at the gift shops, which Mom was like, don't touch those. Noels will not like that. But, there were bunny feet, there was a bunch of, we also saw like an ox.
Right. Basically, it's whatever the Indians could catch and get the fur off of, they would then take to the fort. The fort would give them credit and then let them into the store at the fort where they could use that credit to trade it for goods that they might want, like tobacco or a pipe or whatever. Although Indians made a lot of that stuff from bone, but they could buy other things that they didn't have access to. So that was the purpose of the fort, for the most part, was to be a place where the Native Americans could sell their furs and get goods. And they paid them in credit, not in coin, because that way they had to spend the credit there at the store.
Right.
That way they couldn't spend it with the French or the British or anybody else. It had to be through the American. Now, this whole idea was cobbled together by the Department of War, which was what essentially what do they call it? The Department of, I forget. Oh, the Department of Defense is what they call it now.
Yeah.
And as the guy said he was talking about it, we actually have more wars now that it's called the Department of Defense than we did when it was called the Department of War.
Exactly.
So, but it was their idea, and so it was actually a pretty savvy one. The Osage traded there in droves, and it was successful for what they wanted it to be, a place where the Osage came to trade their goods, and a place where people who were heading west could stop and outfit themselves before going on to the next leg. Now, it didn't stay that way.
Sure.
Because as time went on, Independence was built and it became that. And then the town of Kansas, which eventually became Leavenworth, became that. And these stops increased along the way as towns were built.
Well, certainly.
Towards California, and eventually we became a whole united country. But this was one of the earliest jumping off points,
Absolutely.
Which you pointed out. I don't want to sit here and act like, I know that. You didn't say it, just say it.
You're fine, dear.
Do not want anybody listening to think that I would trade on your mental progress. So that's how the fort was founded. It's really what the fort's purpose was. Anything else you think we should cover in this little section? Now, I know because we're going to talk about Clemson and Sibley here in a bit.
I mean, that's, and the fact that it was not only the trading fort, they also had it as a military installation. It wasn't necessarily a wartime military installation, but it was a military installation because this was during the time of, or shortly thereafter, as we were going through, and the reason William Clark went through there initially was the whole situation with the Louisiana Purchase and with the opening of the western frontier and all of that. So this was one of the first forts on the frontier that was governed by the government as well. So I just think that's something important to keep in mind due to some of the stories that continue to this day about things that are seen and experienced.
Right, and I want to say that they stationed like something in the order of 80 to 100 troops.
Yeah,
there.
it was definitely not a large military installation. I just want to make sure that, well, it was a trading post and it was something that was used for the economic good of the area and for trading purposes. So on not all military, it was also non-military.
Right, well, it was also a factory, which...
Right.
In the original term of a factory.
Kind of almost like a general store, but...
Right. Run by kind of a, for lack of a better term, kind of a governor.
Yes.
But not really like a state governor, but more just like he governed that little area and some little area around it.
Right.
So, that is the basics.
Sure.
We'll build on that. But first, I believe we need to hear a word from our sponsor. Is that what you're sitting there about to say with your slack-jawed mouth open, Krysta?
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. A word from our sponsor.
She's such a smart baby.
She is very smart.
Sorry, I'm getting used to raising my hand because I've been in summer school for almost a whole month now.
That's...
Alrighty. So, we've laid our foundations with the fort. And the one thing we should talk about is the name. Because before it was stuck as Fort Osage, it was known as Fort Clark, and later it became known as Fort Sibley to some extent. But there's a reason that it became Fort Osage.
I thought you were about to say Fort Lewis.
No. It's named Fort Clark because Clark came with several men to establish the garrison. So he came with the Dragoons. That's one reason. Now, Sibley was the name of the factor, the governor, the guy that was there the most. And, in fact, the town around there is named after him.
Yes.
But it was Captain Clemson who named it Fort Osage, and he named it that because it was there to better the Osage people. And that's how it got its name. And that's the name that it carries to this day. In fact, there's a Fort Osage school and all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Fort Osage School District, actually. Right. It's the entire district.
Now, here's the thing. There were really two people in charge of the fort. There was Captain Eli Clemson, and he felt like he was in charge because he was in charge of the military.
Fair enough.
And then there was Mr. Sibley. Mr. Sibley was the factor. He ran the business side of it. In fact, he really wanted to put it on a paying basis, and eventually he kind of did. So he felt like he was in charge. And when they first came to be stationed at the fort, Clemson and Sibley were traveling together. Well, they were late leaving St. Louis, at least according to Clemson's idea, because Sibley was doing stuff. I don't know what stuff, doesn't say, but certainly Clemson felt like Sibley could have been more ready and more able to travel, and they wouldn't have been late getting to the destination. This set up the next 2 years when they didn't speak at all, except through letters that they would mail one another. Basically, the nature of the letters was, I'm in charge, so this is what we're going to do. To which the other one would respond with, no, I'm in charge, and this is what we're going to do. And then they would get horribly upset and mail whichever senator, because they both had people in Washington that took up their side.
Wow.
And so they would then mail the people that were backing them and say, hey, I want to do this. This idiot isn't going along. At which point that person would then go, hey, idiot, go along with Clemson or go along with Sibley. And so it was not a good or comfortable situation for these two. And it probably wasn't a real comfortable situation for anybody who had to work next to them.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, looking at the dining room that Sibley had, looking at the dining room in the officers' quarters, it was, for the time, it was beautiful. I'd eat there now. I mean, it's still awful nice.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the way Cracker Barrels used to be back when they were really trying to push that down-home image. Mm-hmm. They don't do it so much anymore. But once upon a time, I remember, not only did you have the little wooden triangle with the pegs in it, but you had, like, they weren't bone china cups, but they tried their best to make them look like it.
Right.
It was that sort of thing. And that... It looks like what Cracker Barrel was going for back in the day. That's what these places... I mean, just very nice. And you can see that all the cooking was done at the fireplace. So,
sure.
It was rustic cooking, but it would have been good, solid, stick-to-your-ribs kind of heat.
Absolutely. Of course, we here in this area are pretty well known for that. It's not really surprising to me.
Well... It reminds me of, there's an old movie called City Slickers, stars Billy Krysta.
Right.
And at one point in this movie, they're getting ready to go on a cattle run. Mm-hmm. And they're riding with Cookie.
Yes.
And Cookie begins to tell him, I don't got no citified almondine, blah, just going off on all this thing about what he doesn't have. And he's like, the food I make is brown, it's hot, and it's good.
There you go.
And to his credit, everybody likes the stuff Cookie makes, at least until he breaks his leg because he gets drunk and is driving a wagon around. But which may have happened back then too, but it's that sort of thing.
But they didn't put that in the history books very often.
No, they didn't. So, like I said, you got Sibley, who thinks he's in charge. You got Clemson, who thinks he's in charge. They don't talk for 2 years. After that, they talk infrequently.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't just one day decide, oh, okay, I guess I'll deal with you and talk to you and we'll be friends.
So, as I said, it was founded in 1808. In 1813, the fort was evacuated because of the War of 1812. And so everybody who was there got moved out. Now, it was a couple years later, people came back, 1815. When Sibley returned, he was married, so he came back not only with his wife, but her sister, who stayed at the post. And they had a nice big home there. I mean, for 3 people, wasn't bad. Wasn't bad at all.
They built like a cottage, right?
Yeah, it was they built like a little cottage for her, but they had a nice place too. And this was a place where a lot of dignitaries also